We've got halfway there. Half of them anyway got through. So.
Paul is idle as well.
I'm on the holidays.
Without portfolio.
Yeah, that's right. Minister without portfolio.
That's never stopped you before.
It's great. It's great to be able to
Good afternoon.
burden with.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Richmond Buildings in Dublin 7 for the meeting between the authority and the Garda Commissioner. Just for the usual general safety announcements for those in the building, there are emergency exits down there, and if you require help, there's a number of staff in the room if you need to leave. Again, if everyone can switch their mobile phones off, put them to airplane preferably so we don't interfere with the Wi-Fi and the streaming. And again, silence from those not participating in the meeting at all times. And if you do need to leave the meeting, the room during the meeting, just do it as quietly as you can, because it's an engagement between the authority and the Garda Síochána. So please, those who are in the room who are not part of that, just be here silently to observe. Thank you very much, everyone, and over to you, Bob.
Thank you, Helen. Díomh agus fáilte go dtí an cruinniú seo den údarás Pólí nach de go paibli leis an commissioner agus a chorlacha agus Ryan le pléagain agus Raimid Coildír Kisteach over in Trinha. You're very welcome to this meeting of the Policing Authority being held in public with the Commissioner of the Garda Síochána and his colleagues. We have a busy agenda, so we will go straight in. The first item in our agenda is one that relates to the improvement, the quality of and the improvement of the service to the public given by the Garda Síochána. This is a topic which is a constant part of the authority's work and obviously is a constant preoccupation of the Commissioner in terms of, and his colleagues in terms of the policing service that the organisation gives, and which is so profoundly appreciated by the public. We're looking, and will be over the next while, at an aspect that derives from one of the statutory obligations that's placed upon the authority, which is to keep under review the kind of complaints that are made, and also to look at those steps that can give effect to reducing the need for complaints to be made to or about the Garda Síochána. Now, we're describing this engagement as one that relates to expressions of dissatisfaction for two reasons. One, because we are very conscious of the statutory separateness and independence of the Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission and the work that they do, and also because it is a much broader base than simply the question of the issue of complaints being made. And if one could identify a number of categories of issue that arise in this respect. One is performance. The kind of issues of performance management that arise in every organisation, but have a particular resonance, obviously, for the Garda Síochána because of the importance of the role of Gardaí, and indeed of Garda members and Garda staff in the organisation, because of the substance of the work that they do, and because, of course, in relation to attested Gardaí, the powers that they exercise. The second is what one might describe as that issue of awareness or sensitivity. The nature of the engagement that takes place between guard and member of the public. The sensitivity, the empathy, the importance, the primacy indeed of the first contact that an individual may have with the Garda Síochána. And then there are issues of behaviour, which is to say there are issues of times when behaviour falls below the standards that the organisation would wish to see from anybody who works within it. Issues of misconduct, misbehaviour. Because we know from all of our experience and from the consistent work that the authority has done and from the reports that the Commissioner makes to us, we know of the excellence of the service that's provided by the vast majority of people who work in the organisation, and because we know of the extent to which that quality of service is so profoundly appreciated, as I've said, by the public. And then there is a fourth category, which is qualitatively different, and that is the issue of corruption. And these are not necessarily hermetically sealed, each in its own box, but there are areas, I think, where it's necessary to make some kind of distinction, even though there may be overlaps, and we don't expect to have an entirely refined conversation about each in the absence of the other. And we are setting this as being a longish term, certainly a medium term concern, and it's a concern that will undoubtedly move into the new Policing and Community Safety Authority when that body comes to be established at some stage, probably next year. And I make those opening observations simply so that there is an understanding of what we're doing, that today this is not a beginning and end conversation. It's the beginning of a conversation and the beginning of a set of engagements. Well, engagement that have begun long since the authority began, this has been a focus. But in this structured way, this will be a feature of our work over the coming number of years. And to begin, I would ask Shalom Binchy, Authority Member, to open the conversation with the Commissioner. Thank you, Shalom.
Thank you, Chair. I might just start by asking you, Commissioner, what your level of awareness as Commissioner of Garda Síochána is of the poor behaviours and the extent of poor behaviours within the service are.
Well, I would point to a number of areas. Certainly, there is no one-stop shop for poor behaviours, and just given the range of behaviours and indeed corruption and very serious matters that the Chair has outlined. So my awareness then comes from engagement within, and that's engagement obviously with Anti-Corruption Unit under AC Clavin, but also then the National Bureau of Criminal Investigation, which is also undertaken crime investigation where Garda members are involved. So that gives me an insight. Certainly the NBCI work gives me an insight into very serious matters. The ACU, which is also has an intelligence function, gives me an insight into some very serious matters, but also then matters which are being raised to their helpline and to their information line. And rather than receiving information anonymously, as we thought might be the pattern, it's more and more become the pattern that individual members and Garda staff are reporting things directly to the ACU. So we see that as being very positive in terms of people's and our own staff and members' preparedness to engage with our anti-corruption unit and engage with the processes within Garda Síochána. Also then, we have an ongoing relationship in terms of GSOC and their feedback to us in terms of their investigations. And obviously we become aware of those because for some there is suspension criteria to at least be considered whether an individual is suspended or not, and also then their particular analysis in respect of trends. Beyond that then, I suppose then we have the human resources piece and issues around bullying and harassment, human resource issues which might happen within Garda Síochána, and the process by which those are dealt with. And then beyond that again then is the protected disclosures and our awareness of those is protected in statute. The individual makes protected disclosure, does have protections within statute, but obviously in the full course of events would become aware of the issues within that. So I think in terms of just taking a barometer or temperature of what's going on in the organisation, we have a good insight, and some of it is concerning, I have to say, but at the same time it has to say the great majority, I think, engage in very positive behaviours and very committed to the behaviours that we've made clear through the production of policy, the explanation that we provided in terms of acceptable behaviours in the workplace, and also then in the organisational response to the work of the anti-corruption unit.
Okay. So you've sort of focused on the more serious type of complaints there. I'm wondering, do you have a process for receiving information on maybe what might be termed as rudeness, bad behaviour? Because I'm aware that you get a huge number of referrals back from GSOC. I think it was in 2020, 42% of their complaints went back to be investigated by the Gardaí, and they included, things such as rudeness, poor behaviour. And I'm wondering, do you have a process of getting that information up to you so that you can get an idea of the extent of the problem, the types of problems that are repeatedly being complained of, and what's being done about it?
So within AC Clavin's command, obviously, we have our own internal affairs who have the direct relationship then with GSOC, and actually then would be responsible for, in effect, assigning complaints that have been referred to us. So obviously we have an insight there, and we would have an overview of the complaints being made, which have therefore, and the superintendent's assigned to investigate them. And that provides us feedback about those complaints where individuals primarily are dissatisfied around the quality of the response and the quality of the work that they received, as opposed to a crime type complaint. So there is awareness of that, and obviously then that feeds into our training, both for people going through their foundation training in Templemore, but also then in terms of our ongoing professional development at divisional level, but and also then it'll be a feature of our training, both for Garda staff who are front facing, be it on front desk or indeed in command and control. So there is in fact a feedback loop in terms of those complaints.
An informal process, is that fair to say?
The informal?
It sounds like an informal process, is it?
Well, well, if I might look to AC Clavin just to cover a little bit more of just what the detail of it is, and the work of Chief Superintendent Nugent in this area, please, Pat.
So I suppose it's both formal and informal. So I suppose in the first instance, all complaints from the public are required to go to GSOC, who make admissibility decisions. And I suppose one area that they have collaborated with Internal Affairs with is what's called local intervention. So they would be trying to deal with lower level, I suppose, service type complaints, and that has been very satisfactory since about 2019. And that that helps everybody. It helps if you take it your typical member of the public who wants to get satisfaction for their service complaint. It helps GSOC in that they're not devoting unnecessary work to investigations,
okay.
And it helps in Garda Síochána. But there is ongoing formal links between GSOC and ourselves.
Yeah, but I suppose what I'm getting at is, say if I asked you today, to break down the complaints last year, could you tell me that, what were the vast majority of those complaints?
Well, I mean, I
do you have a process where that's recorded?
Yeah,
and
I suppose the GSOC annual report is...
No, but that's GSOC's. Do you internally, do you keep a record, and do you have a process, and do you have a process for feeding up the line?
So every complaint that GSOC deemed to be admissible is also fed back to Internal Affairs and is recorded by Internal Affairs, who are in a position to do just that. But I suppose after a reporting period, we would use the GSOC periodic reports, including their annual report, to tell us about how things are going. Are there more Section 102 referrals this year compared to last year? Are there more ordinary admissible complaints,
okay.
and what are the types? And we would also look at geographically, are there urban
Yeah.
differences, are there rural differences, are there border differences?
Do you look, are there differences from station to station?
Yeah, I suppose we would tend to look at it more on the divisional basis rather than on station to station.
If I walk into a station today and I complain that one of your members has been rude to me, but I don't make a complaint to GSOC, is that recorded somewhere?
And who do you make the complaint to?
I make it to the person on the desk in the guard station.
The person on the desk is
Yeah.
statutorily obliged to forward that to GSOC. There's no discretion about it.
Okay, and that would feed back to you
Yes,
then?
yes.
Okay, so how do you satisfy yourselves that matters that you are referred back to you by GSOC for investigation, where you're investigating yourselves essentially? How do you satisfy yourself that you have a fair, transparent and effective remedy for those dealing with those complaints?
Well, once they come back to us, so normally what would come back to us, they're either supervised by GSOC, in which case an investigating officer from GSOC would supervise the investigation and would come up with what they would call an investigative strategy. But the greater number would be what's called unsupervised complaints that are what people call at least back to Garda Síochána. So we would ordinarily appoint a superintendent to be a deciding officer in accordance with the discipline regulations, and that officer could impose a number of sanctions, like from advice up to a monetary, a temporary reduction in pay. And so we would.
And how many of those, or do you know, like roughly how many reductions in pay you imposed last year?
It's in the GSOC annual
just roughly,
report.
can you give us an indication?
I don't have them
You
off
don't
the
have-
top of my
okay,
head,
fair
but I mean
enough.
there's a range of different, and I can provide them to you afterwards if you need them.
That's fine. Okay, can I come back to you, Commissioner? Can I ask you what your view of just general rudeness is within the service, because that seems to form the basis of a large number of complaints every year, and I'd just like to know what your view of that is by your members.
Well, I appreciate that is a theme within the public complaints made to GSOC, and we're very aware of that particular element. It's hard for me to then extrapolate that out to suggest then that we're overwhelmed with rude people. I don't think we are. We put a lot of effort in our training in terms of the nature of the exchange that one should have with a member of the public, and in particular that's concentrated upon in foundation training and throughout an individual's probation. So rudeness isn't tolerable.
Sorry to interrupt you, but is there any post foundational training? Is there any further training on that?
The characteristic of being civil to the public and being polite is just absolutely integral to successful policing. So I do expect then that supervisors will deal with that if they see it, and deal with it by way of drawing that behaviour, if it's poor behaviour, to the individual's attention and correction. So it is a matter then for on the ground supervision in terms of making sure that such rudeness isn't permitted, and
have you ever tackled that yourself? Have you ever
rudeness?
I don't mean like in an individual case. I mean,
it's actually regrettably it's not that long since I've had to tackle rudeness. Yes, yes, within recent weeks. Yes.
Okay. Can I ask you what action you took?
Oh, well, I think I spoke to the person in the appropriate manner so they understood just how vexed I was at the situation, yes.
Okay. And do you accept that the first response of the Gardaí to a victim, a suspect or a witness or any member of the public in their dealings with the Guards is crucial and critical in shaping that person's perception, their attitude and ultimately their trust in Garda Síochána?
Well, all of that's integral to delivering a successful policing service. We enjoy public confidence, and in part that public confidence is built on the quality of the relationship, and in large part built on the quality of the relationship then that we have with the public, the trust they place in us, and that's absolutely essential to us in terms of delivery of our policing function. So the relationship with the public, and therefore then, you know, very much in a very appropriate relationship, even in the day-to-day dealings, is one which I regard as being very important. Yes.
Okay. And do you see or accept that, you know, report after report shows up really serious flaws on that first response? Like, for example, we saw it in the CAD 999 issues, that there were issues in terms of the first response there. We saw it again recently in the report on travellers' access to justice, that there are really serious issues on first response. We saw it in the Children's Rights and Police Questioning report by Louise Ford and Ursula Kilkelly. We saw it in the Garda Inspectorate report on delivering custody services. And we see it all the time in our feedback from our outreach work and from NGOs, that the first response is often woefully inadequate. I mean, do you accept that this just keeps coming up again and again as a problem for Garda Síochána?
Well, I accept the pattern that you've outlined in terms of those various reports, and I don't set out to challenge the individual finds reports. What we have to do then is to find those themes and deal with those. We've undertaken to do that, and the report in respect of the experience of the travelling community in the criminal justice system was the latest of such reports, and we take these very seriously and will respond appropriately. These are opportunities for us to further develop our service. At the same time, I would say, you know, I receive very many compliments in respect to the service we provide in the most difficult of circumstances, I would say as well. So there is a balance which really doesn't often get into the public domain about the amount of good work which is also done as well. And I think even in all of those reports, it will highlight the very significant work undertaken by Gardaí to support individuals who've been vulnerable against in the circumstances that they found themselves.
So what I'm taking from what you're saying is that you're saying, you know, overall we're doing great work. When we get reports, we take them seriously, we respond to them. But at what point does it prompt you, do these reports upon reports prompt you to take overall action, not just specifically on that report, but on an organisational level, that you just have to say, look, our first response is just not good enough?
Well, I don't think I'm at the position of saying that our first response isn't good enough. I don't lightly say that our work is good and that's sufficient. Every day I receive reports about the work that goes on in the organisation, and there is tremendous work happens from day to day. Yes, individuals have identified specific issues, and there are themes there. We've undertaken to do the work through our human rights committees to assess that and then see what we might do then in terms of our policy and outlook, but also then what additional training and what additional supervision is required as well. So we in no way are ignoring this or in fact saying another report and putting it to one side. We are taking it very seriously.
Okay. Well, I'm going to come to the report by Dr. Cindy Joyce and others at the University of Limerick on Irish travellers' access to justice. I mean, that report, I think it's fair to say, is a damning report and lays bare a very significant problem of racism within Garda Síochána towards our national ethnic minority. Can I ask you what your immediate response to that report is, please?
Well, I was very concerned to see the report. Obviously, they themselves, the authors described it as depressing and sometimes distressing read. And so I was very concerned that it contains accounts of allegations against Gardaí which amount to mistreatment, misconduct, and at times allegations as well of criminal behaviour. I would say anyone who's got such complaints they should take them. They should take those to GSOC in the first place. That's the proper venue by which such serious allegations should be dealt with. There are obviously some positive interactions, and particularly highlight the interactions with our community Gardaí. So that's good, but I do acknowledge that the negative within the report far outweighs the positive elements. So we are taking it very seriously. We have our own advisory committee, and we wish then to examine these and examine the recommendations and see what more then we need to do in respect of that report. I would like to link it though to the other reports that you've referenced yourself today, so that we have an overall response. We try and identify the themes and then deal with those themes. Rose to my left can talk to something of the interaction we have with the traveller community at a national level.
I only have a few minutes, so
Okay.
if you don't mind, I'm just going to stick on the report. Can I ask you what at this stage, do you have any idea of what action you're going to take, other than taking it seriously? What action you're going to take in response to the report?
Hang on a second, please. As I've said, I asked that it be lifted by human rights, our own Human Rights Committee, who were to examine this. Sorry, I can't find it now, but we are setting up then within Garda Síochána a group that will lead on examination of this report, an examination of recommendations, and then see how that impacts upon our obligations to to the traveller community in terms of providing a policing service, but then what other organisational learning there is for us.
And what's your
Sorry,
time?
may I let Kate in?
Just to assist, and I know you're short of time, the report was published the day before our Strategic Human Rights Committee met. You'll be aware of the numerous external bodies represented on that, and at that it was agreed that the first step will be for our Human Rights Unit to engage with the authors, Cindy Joyce and Jennifer Schwepp and others, with a view to developing proposals to go to the next Strategic Human Rights Committee, which will be in 3 months' time, with practical recommendations as to prioritising the very large amount of the report that referred to the over-policing of the traveller community and the under-supporting of victims from the traveller community. But of course that report is a composite report that reports on all aspects of the criminal justice system, and equally we have to form partnerships with a seamless end-to-end response to that report.
Okay,
because
it's only because I have time constraint, I'm really sorry, but are there any immediate actions? Was there any immediate response to this report, or has it all been put to committee?
No, there was an immediate response in that working with the authors, and they made an immediate suggestion to us in terms of putting up in effect, I think, information videos in respect of the use of Garda powers. Because I think even in our first interactions with the authors, the understanding of search of premises with or without warrant, the dealings with individuals in terms of examining driving documents, etc. So what we intend to do is in effect, create short films and put them on social media, which explain then Garda powers in respect of stopping a vehicle, the documents that can be required to be examined, searching premises, arrest, etc. Because I think there was quite a bit of misunderstanding about how Garda powers are applied and how they can be used.
But do you think that the misunderstanding is on the part of the travellers whose houses were searched or homes were searched without a warrant, or a misunderstanding on the part of the Gardaí who went in?
Well, we want to actually try and inform, and it is our intention to inform not just the traveller community but wider society as well about how Garda powers are used now.
Okay, but the report shows a really stark, it's one of the stats that jumped out, that 50% of the respondents to the report had been present in a home that was entered into uninvited by the Gardaí in 5 years prior to the survey, and only 11% said that the Gardaí presented a search warrant. I mean, I can't see that happening in other sectors of our community, I have to say. And what I'm picking up from you is that you seem to be interpreting that as a problem with the understanding of the people whose homes have been violated, not a problem with the Gardaí who violated that home in breach of international European Convention of Human Rights and our own constitution. And that's a worrying response.
Well, I'm not sure that I can agree that all of these are violations. There's allegations made which have not been in effect. First, that we received this report last week, so we want to work our way through it and then be able to answer it. But there can be very legitimate reasons why Gardaí enter premises, any premises, and there can be reasons actually outside of a possession of warrant as well. So there are valid reasons, very tightly controlled, obviously, as to why Gardaí would enter a dwelling or enter premises, but they do exist.
In circumstances where they're uninvited and they don't have a warrant?
Well,
there'd be very limited circumstances.
Well, again, we want to understand more of substance of the report.
Okay.
And the substance, the allegations.
That's fair enough. It's the report is you're saying you got it very recently. But if your investigation shows, or your consideration of this report shows that a review of these entering into homes without a warrant and without invitation, will you be investigating them as breaches of constitutional rights? Will you be looking into that in more detail?
Well, that would be a misuse of powers, and might well then, in effect, be a discipline matter. That would be regards a very serious matter.
Okay. The report also shows that 59% of those who were stopped in the last 5 years believe they were stopped purely because they were a traveller. It shows that 53% of those stopped stated that the guard who stopped them had a reputation for stopping travellers. What do you say to that finding in the report?
Again, very concerning, and that's why we want to take the time to understand more about this and then what our response should be.
And to you, does that sound like racial profiling?
Sorry?
To you, does that sound like racial profiling?
Well, I don't believe we do undertake racial profiling, and I'm not, so frankly, I'm not in a position to accept that that's an allegation in Garda Síochána.
But it's not an allegation, it's a finding based on extensive research.
But I have to say this is a finding made without recourse to us to have a response to it, and this is the place we're in at the moment. The report is published and we are given no opportunity prior to its publication to respond to it. So don't accept that report that we haven't been able actually to form a view of and then make a response to it, then I must accept that finding. We have to do our own inquiry. Racial profiling is a very serious allegation to level against in Garda Síochána. And before I would accept that, I'd want to be certain on the reasons why I was accepting that allegation.
Okay, but I'm just asking you, does that raise alarm bells with you that this might be racial profiling, if I could put it like that?
Well, obviously it does, yes. And that's why we've already commenced work. We take it very seriously and we've put it through, and we will deal with it through our Senior Human Rights Committee.
Okay. The report goes on to say that 91% of travellers do not believe Gardaí treat them with respect. 83% of travellers who reported a crime said the report was not taken seriously. 67% of travellers who reported a crime said they were not treated respectfully. And 31% who experienced a crime said they did not report that, and in the main that was because they had a lack of trust in Garda Síochána. They also reported hearing overt racism by Garda Síochána, and 64% of travellers who were in custody in the 5 years prior to the report said they didn't feel safe in custody. And all of this has led to a situation where 84% of the travellers who were asked disagreed with the statement that the Gardaí in their area treated everyone fairly regardless of who they are. I mean, do you think, is it your opinion that that report really shows a very problematic relationship between Garda Síochána and the travelling community?
Well, I do accept how stark it is, the statistics in respect of confidence in Garda Síochána and almost a mirror image of the general population. So that is very stark in itself, and the acceptance then, which has been long accepted by Garda Síochána, that about the importance of our outreach to the traveller community. So I entirely accept the seriousness of the deficit there is in our relationship with the traveller community, and indeed the deficit there is in respect of the trust they have in Garda Síochána and I think most seriously their reluctance to report matters and report being the victim of crime to Garda Síochána is one of the most stark things, because that in effect means that they themselves are at greater risk. And those are areas certainly that we'll wish to concentrate upon in the first place.
Okay, well, we look forward to seeing what work is undertaken as a result of this report. Thank you.
Sorry, Sinead, can I just clarify?
Yes, of course.
The sanction figures that you asked me about.
Yes.
So sanctions that would range from advice to reprimand were 45, and sanctions of a monetary nature were 10, and they're just relating to GSOC related complaints.
And is that for last year?
That's for 2021, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Valerie, who's with us on the link, is next. And we can't hear you.
No.
Oh, there you go.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, sorry, I wasn't muted at this end. Good afternoon, Commissioner and colleagues. Good to meet again. Sorry, just technically on the screen I'm seeing two images of myself. I'm not seeing the people I'm speaking to. I can carry on, but it's a bit disconcerting. Anyway, maybe that can be fixed. So I'm afraid I'm not making eye contact over the screen, as it were. Anyway, let's move on with it. There's kind of two areas I'm interested in. I want to go back to the area of complaints and develop some of what Shalom was talking about there. And then in a few minutes, and we'll come to it rather than jump in, I'm interested in the whole performance management, the PALF process, how that's improving behaviour in other areas and how it's moving along generally. So just at the outset, we don't like the term complaints, actually. I think internally we prefer to use expressions of dissatisfaction, because complaint immediately sounds like a personal attack, which can generate sort of a defensive approach, and that's human nature. But however, our legislation actually provides for the authority, gives us a particular remit under Section 62 to keep, for the authority to keep itself generally informed as to, one, complaints made against members of the Garda Síochána and the application of disciplinary regulations. And the authority also has the statutory function to undertake in research and other activities which may contribute to a reduction in the number of complaints against members of the Garda Síochána. So we're interested in complaints at that human behaviour level that Shalom addressed, but also as an indicator systemically of quality of service and of sort of, I suppose, cultural signals as well. So maybe to begin with, Commissioner, like as Commissioner, when you're assessing the quality of service provided across the organisation, do you have like a suite of metrics that you use, and does complaints measurement feature that in there, and if so, how?
Thank you. I think if I might...
I can see you now. That's much healthier. Okay,
fine. If I might turn to Pat again, just to explain around the process in internal affairs and the information then we receive from
Could I just maybe interrupt? Because I am aware of the different channels, you know, I mean, we've got some information from you. So I know in terms of avenues of complaints, you'd have a range of protected disclosures, you've the anti-corruption unit, you've corporate services, internal affairs, there's complaints to different parts of the organisation, you've bullying harassment procedures, you've confidential reporting. So you've lots of really good processes in the organisation. I'm wondering, when you get together with the executive team and you see how are we doing, do you have a suite of metrics for the whole organisation, for a start nationally, you know, that tells you where you are?
Well, really, what we have are the things that I've outlined already and that you've mentioned there. So beyond that, there is no further measures that I'm aware of in terms of giving us feedback actually on the quality of service. No. And
is that something you? By the way, there's always room for improvement and everything. So going forward, would you see a value in better granularity in the different types of feedback mechanisms that you have, and see it as an indicator of organisational performance, and then moving down towards, you know, districts and units, and I suppose then at a local level to individuals? Is there merit for you in collecting evidence that can be analysed and interrogated to inform you, rather than, you know, anecdotal feedback?
Well, that's the process which is underway within Garda Síochána. It has started with more senior matters or more serious matters rather than the quality of the service we're providing. It has started with more serious matters involving ACU and MBCI around discipline and allegations of crime or corruption. But just in terms of just our understanding of the performance of divisions, etc., our public attitude survey gives us an insight around in respect of the quality of service from division to division. So that's an important piece of this, and we've invested in that so that we get a more granular response in terms of how divisions are doing.
Okay, and obviously that's very useful metric, and I think it's interesting that you have that broken down throughout the organisation. Actually, in relation to what Shalom was saying earlier, I think that's one of the metrics where the Travellers stakeholder group identified a lower percentage of satisfaction than the general public. So it might be useful if you can get that information to drill in and see are there trends across the organisation there. But listen, moving back, the Council of Europe HR Commission has identified 4 levels of complaints against conduct of a police officer, okay? So if I take it as they describe it, the highest would be where their issues of criminal culpability arise. Next would be maybe violation of a fundamental human right or freedom. Then it goes down into disciplinary culpability. And then the last one is poor or inadequate work performance. And from what I'm hearing, you are addressing those 4 areas. You know, you've got the anti-corruption unit, you've got internal affairs, you've got a disciplinary process, and you've got a performance management process. So I'm going to come back to the performance management piece in a minute. Can I just come back to the sort of lower level complaints piece? Because again, some of the research that the authority has started to conduct in speaking with stakeholders, it appears that members of the public find the complaints process, and even members of your own organisation, confusing. Not everybody, surprisingly enough to us, I suppose, but not everybody out there in the public knows really what GSOC necessarily is. So I'm just wondering if I have maybe an unpleasant incident with a Garda that my interpretation is of rude behaviour or whatever else, and it is in the eye of the beholder sometimes, and I go down to my local station and I say I want to make a complaint about a Garda met down the town there this morning. What happens to that? You know, does that get recorded in any way?
Well, I think. Well, if I looked at Pat, but
no, that's fine.
We have no discretion on this. So, Pat, if you can.
Yeah.
So I suppose there are a number of ways that a complaint can be made to GSOC, and I suppose one obvious one is at your local Garda station, and there's an obligation on the Garda to forward that to GSOC. You can also make a complaint to a member of Chief Superintendent and higher at place other than the Garda station, or indeed you can make a complaint directly to GSOC yourself.
So if I go in, and I really want to talk to this at a human level for those people who might be looking on today who aren't familiar with everything we are familiar. So if I go down and I make a complaint as a regular person, what am I told? Am I told to go to GSOC? Am I given a form? Do they take out a notebook and write something down?
They will take out a form, and they will give you, as the member of the public, they'll give you a copy of your complaint. Okay. And then they will send it in various directions, including to Internal Affairs and to GSOC themselves. So you will be aware, and you'll be asked to sign the complaint.
Okay. Yeah. And do I get feedback then later as to where it's gone to?
GSOC will contact you. Like GSOC will make an admissibility decision. So
and then tell me if they're doing it or they.
Yeah, but I suppose the first thing they will say is, in their definition, is this an admissible complaint? And if it's an admissible complaint, is it one that's suitable for informal resolution? Are you dissatisfied with the service you got from us, and can this be resolved quite quickly? So that's a very obvious way, and it's something that has been very successful since 2019.
Even at the informal resolution, it still goes to GSOC and comes back?
Oh yes, GSOC makes a decision about cases that they deem to be suitable for informal resolution, and it takes the consent of you as the complainant and the individual Garda. If either party don't consent to this local intervention process, then it will go back for fuller investigation. But it has actually been proven very satisfactory on both sides.
Well, I think that's reassuring. So the message to go out to people today was that if you have a complaint, it goes into a process.
Particularly if it's a service-type complaint. If you're not satisfied with getting a call back, or your form not being signed, or that type of thing, and all you really want is to get your service attended to, it's really good in those instances.
Now, there's obviously very valuable information being collected there, because you'll have when the complaint was, where it was, the nature of the complaint. GSOC, I know, are developing categories of complaints, etc. So, do you at this stage, or do you have plans to, have a kind of a database so that you can aggregate that and tease it through and see have we got trends? Is something happening in Wexford that isn't happening in Mayo, and why?
Oh yes, we would, and not alone are we getting formal statistical information, but we're having regular management type meetings with GSOC, and GSOC will tell us softer information. They'll tell us that maybe in a certain part of the city that they perceive it that Gardaí are maybe abusing their power of stop and search, or they're being rude, or whatever else. So we would address that then back with the local chief superintendent or the local superintendent, and say, I think you have a problem there in that part of the city. Okay.
There was a recent Institute of Global Policing seminar in the UK, and they, I think this is a quote from as a result of the conference, that I just thought it was an interesting quote: failure to hold officers to account for minor abuses of power leads to a culture of impunity, right? Now, we know the history of unfortunate things that happened in your organisation, even before the authority was set up, and so much has been done around about it. But in terms of lifting that basic culture and establishing acceptable behaviours, that's the piece I'm interested in. Yeah. So you get a message back, and there's a question of a certain type of behaviour being acceptable in a certain station or district. Do you as an organisation sort of share this knowledge with a view to lifting the bar all the time, or how do you do that with your senior management?
I suppose what I would say is we've been doing a lot over the last number of years, I suppose, to foster a culture of speaking up, particularly among our own people, to get peers to address poor standards of behaviour, to make it that, you don't accept if somebody is rude, or if somebody is a bit over judicious and stop or search, or appears to be abusing their powers. So that's a big culture change that's coming in. Now, I suppose when we looked in preparation for this meeting, when we looked at it, we have a lot of different ways by which if you want to call them complaints, can be dealt with. And,
Yeah.
you know, I suppose having something in a central repository to produce instant figures is something that we probably need to work on for the future. So I do think we're trying our best to you know, foster a culture of better behaviour, be it through the Ethics and Culture Bureau, be it through, we're just after conducting our second cultural audit of the organisation, where our people are telling us how they perceive the organisation, including the senior management, you know, and...
the last cultural audit, what year was it? Was it
2018? It was published.
2018, yeah. I remember there were views expressed that, you know, the inclination was to keep the head down and not speak up because it could damage your career, or it could... And it is difficult. If you have one person in a unit of 12 where there's a culture of... It could be, you know, a bit of macho behaviour. It could be a tough attitude. It could be, you know, you can just get a wrong set of shared values, and it can be hard for somebody to balance off that.
I think just to go back to the point the Commissioner made earlier, I'm actually pleasantly surprised at the level of reports that are coming to the anti-corruption unit, where colleagues are not prepared to put up with a colleague on the unit who's doing things that are not acceptable. So I think that's actually a positive thing, and I don't want to go into specific numbers or anything else, but I'm actually pleasantly surprised at the numbers of reports that we're getting.
Well, in fact, the numbers might be the meat of it actually in time. You know, I mean, if you've got a baseline now, and I think that may be the advantage of that kind of collation of even very basic, you know, even complaints at the lowest levels, as we can see, you know, things climb as acceptability bars sort of rise, and you have a baseline there. You know, when I was preparing for this, I was reminded of, I don't know if you remember, there was an ad about 20 years ago for a famous brewing company, and it was a guy walking along a dusty corridor, and he hears a phone ring, and it's a dusty room, and he answers the phone, and he looks around, and he says, "Oh, this is the complaints department, right?" And you'll all remember the ad, or some of us remember the ad. And of course, the message was probably the message was, we don't get complaints here, and yet actually, you know, the best service, you know, delivery companies these days seek out complaints.
I think you're making a really good point. It's if we root out the smallest levels of misbehaviour early, and I think the key for it is the new people coming in. The key for it is well-trained sergeants that intervene and that set the tone and the standard for everybody. Then I think we will address lots of the issues, because I suppose unchecked people may just misbehave further.
Okay, I'm watching the clock here, and not much time left. But just to move on to the performance management and learning framework, the path that you have. First of all, can somebody tell me roughly where are you at this stage across the organisation in terms of compliance with conducting the process?
Okay, thanks. If I look to Joe here, but may I also add there's also team performance as well, and we put a huge emphasis on team performance. And if you look at, say, our figures in respect of Operation Cohesive and the callbacks, and how much the organisation lifted its performance, and that was a real team effort, but a team effort made up of obviously the individuals. So there is a second facet beyond just how the organisation does and how individuals do. There is this piece about mid and senior managers actually leading their teams and be proactive in the performance that their team delivers. But let Joe speak to the individual.
I think you have made a very important point, obviously, because people follow the tone of their leader. So if you start at the top, Commissioner, with the right tone, and that goes down, cascades down, it'll work. But in all organisations, sometimes the cascade can get blocked, and you need bottom-up and sideways influence as well. Just on the compliance, Joe, what percentage would you be at this stage?
So last year, 89% was the figure that we ended up with. This year to date, it's currently running at 54%. We're engaged in a fairly extensive communications campaign to push that on further with, you know, using screensavers, messages on Newsbeat, and so on. So we believe there's a lot of work still in that space. I guess, Valerie,
in the areas, I was going to actually lead to some question, but I don't think you'll be able to answer it at this point. But I was going to ask you in terms of, was there a correlation, say, between parts of the organisation that are enthusiastic about performance management and learning processes, or those that aren't, and levels of complaints? Now, if you're not analysing the level of complaints, you can't do that correlation, so we'll move on from that. But is that something that, you know, when you've got this kind of statistical data, it can throw up systemic questions? Is that the kind of thing you're looking at in the future?
Yeah, so there is, you know, we have statistics obviously on PALF usage across the various regions, and we can break that down. I have the figures, I don't have the percentages, unfortunately, but the level is by and large similar across the organisation, you know, across each of the individual regions. There's not a massive variation in those figures.
I think it takes a push when we have to encourage people. I suppose some of the busier people might find it harder to complete their formal PALF than maybe less busy places.
You know, I found in organisations it's not always busyness. It's something about, you know, an enthusiasm about the process. And I think if you have areas that aren't enthusiastic about the process, you have to ask why. You know, have you?
I think, Valerie,
have you looked at reasons for resistance?
So as it stands at the moment, there's a review team that are looking at our PALF policies, and they're looking at a variety of areas about what, you know, how it's being used, or why it's being used, or what it might be used for in the future. And the group will report before the end of the year, but it will be later in the year. But the sorts of things they're looking at are reporting lines, challenges for mixed reporting between Garda members and Garda staff, potential linkages to other policies. Okay. So, for example, promotions, access to competitions, increments. The sorts of things I think I'm certainly old enough to remember when PMDS was introduced in the civil service. When it started off, it was very much, I suppose, where PALF is today, which is a process for recording and engagement. And it really took off to a far greater extent when you start bringing in the sorts of areas that you would expect it to include. So access are being more actively used in promotional processes and an incremental piece. It's also looking at things like the benefits of the team goal versus the personal goal, and from what I'm hearing, there's more of a focus that that the feedback that's coming is that more personal goals are what is being desired and seen as being there.
Back to the sort of complaints piece, because it's a difficult. You don't want to. I understand completely why you don't want a performance and learning development and learning process to be overly confused with or to be confused at all with the disciplinary process. So I'm just thinking, if you have, say, a Garda against whom there have been a number of complaints, and the complaints have gone through the rounds and been, you know, substantiated, is there room or is there space before a disciplinary process to use the PALF system to put some learning and personal improvement programs in place?
Can I talk just more broadly? And I think that is not, that linkage isn't there, but more broadly, if you look at the duties that are assigned to the sergeant and the inspector, if I can read out just a couple of pieces on that, because it brings home, I suppose, the broader responsibilities in that space. So the sergeant's supervisory role in quality assurance includes taking responsibility for the performance management and development of individual Gardaí. Where the performance management system operates through a series or a set of formal performance meetings, effective performance management is predicated on a supervisor's ability to give frequent, objective and timely feedback on performance. This requires that sergeants be particularly good at observing the quality of members' work and giving focused feedback and guidance in the here and now, and so on. So, like, we're talking about that in its broadest sense. So, the responsibility at that supervisory level is seen as key for sergeants and inspectors in terms of the individuals that are working to them. And clearly the PALF is the tool in which you can record the pieces around that, but ultimately it does come back to those supervisors to take on those roles, to develop those who are working in their individual teams. Okay,
so you've PALF on the one hand, and that's positive and productive, and you know, and I can see the success building already in terms of both it happening and then improvements on the ground. Where the PALF process maybe hasn't worked for an individual, or the individual hasn't cooperated, whatever, and maybe is the subject of complaints, etc. Coming back to what you mentioned earlier, does that come into play at all when a person's being considered for promotion? Can you be sure, I mean, can the Commissioner be sure that every person being promoted isn't, on the other hand, the subject of multiple complaints where the two sets of data didn't match?
It's certainly the Commissioner, like part of the decision that's ultimately made would include a consideration of complaints or discipline issues that are there. It forms part of that particular process. Yes.
Yeah, and one would hope that using the PAF process, you'd head it off and it wouldn't come to a disciplinary process, that the behaviour would change because the person would learn that it's actually not acceptable.
I think the agreement on the introduction, no more than it was with PMDS in the first instance, the agreement on the introduction of PALF at a technical level was that it wouldn't be used in the fashion as you described.
Yeah.
But that's clearly where we wanted to go.
That's kind of where we're going. So, and I know I'm getting quite micro, but I think it's very important, and also for members of your own organisation who might be listening today. So, is it appropriate in a PALF conversation for a sergeant to say to a Garda, or an inspector to say to a sergeant, look, I'm noticing, an increase of complaints in your area. It's out of sync with everybody else. What are you doing about this? What are you doing about changing your behaviour as part of your own personal development? Is that the kind of conversation that can happen?
Because I read out the duties there of the sergeant and the inspector are not.
Yeah, but I'm asking what happened.
Yeah, so those meetings, those ongoing engagement between the sergeant and the team, both formal and informal, are very much to talk about developing the team manager and the team member, and also to intervene where there are issues that are being seen in relation to broader performance. So very much so.
Okay. Could I just, before I close, come back to Commissioner, if I may?
Yep.
Might swing around.
Yes, Valerie. Yep.
Do you have a curiosity in this sort of systemic analysis coming to your desk or to the executive team to see trends across units, divisions, and districts, or improvements over time, in the sense that complaints might be a useful metric?
Well, yes, and that's been set out. I think the additional piece is really around that, as you say, the individual quality of service. But we do take great notice of actually team performance and variation, and also in team performance, both regional, divisional, and into the smaller units as well. So it's just I just re-emphasise that our work is teamwork, and we need all our individuals to be present and contributing. But one of the ways of achieving that is through the proper supervision and direction of members, and we feel we achieve that through our focus on various targets, the performance of individual divisions, for instance, and what might be done to correct those who are falling behind, and also commend those who are doing well.
Well, I was just about to say before I close off, I think it's also open to members of the public to compliment Gardaí and to go into the Garda station and say I got particularly good service from somebody today or yesterday. Does that get recorded?
Well, it really, what happens in that regard is that the individuals. So if someone writes to me, and this is a weekly occurrence. People would write to me and commend a piece of work done by members of Garda Síochána, Garda staff, and I would make sure that that's known to the individuals involved, but also then to their supervisors, and obviously then we would respond to the individual themselves. And it's always good to see. And just as it happens, within the last few weeks, I've seen people write in around very difficult circumstances that they were in terms of being victim of serious crime, and just very complimentary of the quality of service that was provided to them. And so it does make me very conscious then of those who are less likely to report crimes to Garda Síochána and what we might do in that regard. But it's always pleasing to see that people take the time to write and compliment the work done.
Okay.
Sorry, Commissioner, can I just make a point in relation to the performance management? And another key plank of our performance management process is our PAF process, our Performance and Accountability Framework. And that stems from the very top of the organisation all the way down to the operational station level. And through that process, all incidents are reviewed and considered. And then at a national level and regional and divisional level, then we have a process of KPI scrutiny across a number of different areas, including service to victims. And so if I can just give an example, so the victim assessment screens and the supers considerations for victims, our target for that is 85% compliance. We're generally somewhere between 86 and 90% compliance in that regard. Equally, our callbacks to victims, we started off with a target of 65%, and we're normally in the range of 77 to 90% on a consistent basis. Other areas that we look at in that context are investigating guards, investigating members assigned to sexual offences, missing persons reviews, firearms renewals, a whole host of areas there.
So is PAF, Deputy Commissioner, is PAF the place then to collate the data about the nature and type and frequency and location, etc., of complaints, and to aggregate it into PAF, where people can, where divisions or districts? How far does PAF go? Does it go down to unit? Anyway,
it goes down to unit, yeah, to unit level.
If I'm a sergeant, I can see, well, in my unit there's been so many complaints in the last 6 months, but how do I compare? How does that compare with the rest of the country? Am I average, above average, below average? Is that something that PAF would be designed to do?
Well, PAF is really about the performance in terms of addressing or investigating incidents, etc. But broadly speaking, if our systems were sophisticated enough to give that aggregate data down to the station and unit level, that of course would be helpful. Even in the general sense, in terms of trends, etc., without going into specifics, it certainly would be helpful. But as things stand, we don't have that level of sophistication.
Okay. And I think that's really important, because we've lots of separate discussions here and with other bodies about your need for investment in ICT. And I think it's very important to see how ICT can enable you to link service performance with an individual unit and enable that unit to see how they stand with the rest across the country. Because I think if you've that kind of comparative information, you'll only rise the bar, because everybody wants to be, I presume, as good or better than their peers. So is that something you'd agree with?
No, absolutely. I mean, we all want to do better. And I suppose there's an element of competitiveness in all of us as well, apart from the overriding desire to serve the public better. So again, all these things will be welcome in due course.
So in summary, you'd like the public to tell you whether it's positive or negative feedback, and there's a process for negative feedback to go to GSOC, and everything gets recorded and looked after. There's an ongoing listening in terms of what training's required around behaviour. There's cultural audits, which you will listen to and will tell you where the culture is going, and you need ICT to be able to gather the evidence, interrogate it, and feed it back to your managers. Is that what
well, I suppose any ICT system is only as good as the information that's gathered and the input, the quality of the data that's gathered. So, but yes, absolutely. And just if I can just conclude by making one point. You asked about, in terms of complaints or against individuals who are going for promotion or whatever. The current process is such that the individuals apply and there isn't an input at that point in terms of whether there are or aren't complaints. It's only at the concluding stages, when the individual has actually been selected for promotion, that the Commissioner has an opportunity to consider that.
I'm sorry
I also do understand, I'm finishing now, Chair, but I also do understand that the process needs to be fair to the individual, so it's completed processes around complaints, because we don't want vicarious issues to be interfering. Okay, I'd just like that to be addressed in case you thought otherwise. Chair, I think I'm over my time, so thank you very much.
Thanks,
thank you,
Valerie.
Commissioner, Deputy Commissioner.
Thank you, Valerie. And clearly, there's a whole range of issues to which we will return, and there's the issue of getting information from the top down to the individual units, from the individual units to the top so that there can be a clear overview available to the Commissioner and his senior leadership team. There are issues of what your own sense would be of the ideal way in which somebody who is maybe just dissatisfied for some reason or other with the way in which they've been treated, a delay, inattention, curtness, maybe even rudeness or not getting a call back. What would be the ideal solution to that? Because if timeliness if correction is better than, if prevention is better than cure, if development is better than correction, then the speed with which some of these things are resolved is a critical consideration. And we'll come back to some of those issues at a later stage, and they're not irrelevant at the times in which we live, given that the legislative change is going to come. Thank you for that. Elaine Byrne is going to look at the anti-corruption issue and to talk to you about that, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. So last time we spoke in a public session about corruption was the corruption unit, which is still relatively new and still bedding in, was May of last year. So really the purpose of today is an update where we are now in terms of staffing, policy development, preventative measures and engagement within the force, which you've already touched upon, Assistant Commissioner. So my first question really is, could you give me an outline in terms of the staffing levels, in terms of the numbers within the anti-corruption unit, the grades that are involved and the qualifications or requirements that people have to be a member of that unit?
So,
Pat, do you have those?
Yeah, I have the stats. So we've one chief superintendent, we've 2 detective superintendents, 2 detective inspectors, 2 inspectors. We have a HEO, we have 10 detective sergeants, 2 executive officers, 11 detective Gardaí and 1 clerical officer. We haven't reached our initial complement, and I suppose one of our challenges recently is they've been very successful at promotion competitions, so that we have recently gotten approval from the executive for an additional 4 sergeants and 20 Gardaí, so that would bring our complement up quite significantly. But as I say, we've had quite a number get promoted. We were very pleased that they have finally moved into their new premises in Garda headquarters, and they have been given very good support in terms of the likes of vehicles, ICT, etc. So they're quite talented people, and I suppose the indication for that is that they've scored particularly highly at the promotion competitions. And unfortunately, they've come to the top of the crop disproportionately.
Would I be right in saying, Assistant Commissioner, that that's a significant complement of staff? Are you satisfied, aside from the requirements or the request for additional staff, compared to last year, for example?
Oh yeah, we have progressed a lot, but it's just that we're after having a number of rounds of promotion recently, and it has just taken away from us. So the challenge is to backfill the vacancies and to increase the strength, but we're working towards that.
And apart from the grades of staff, which you've outlined, what kind of staff in terms of educational background?
Yeah, we've plenty of them that have, like human rights training, that have, governance courses at various levels. They have lots and lots of relevant types of qualifications, from law degrees to master's degrees. They're generally well educated, plus some very competent investigators as well.
And you mentioned IT systems. Could you outline a little bit more there?
So I suppose we have been looked after in terms of our normal requirements, but we have some bespoke requirements that we're working with Andrew Sullivan and his people to develop into the future. There would be some sensitive bespoke systems that we would require to do our work.
And without delving into the confidentiality or sensitivity of those, can you outline a little bit what you mean by bespoke?
That would be required for work of this sensitive nature that I'm sure the authority would appreciate.
And can you talk to me a little bit on progress on policy development, for example, on drug testing?
Yeah, I'm pleased to report that having made a submission to the department in February of last year, that we now have a legal basis for drug testing. So the Garda Functions and Operating Model Act 2022, Part 4 of that Act contains the legal basis for drug testing. And drug testing will take place primarily for all Garda applicants pre-employment, for all student Gardaí in training, and on a 5% random basis for all Garda personnel on a yearly basis. The department, in conjunction with the Office of the AG and the Attorney General's Office, are working on regulations that are required, and our expectation is that those regulations will be in place by September of this year. Our procedures document is being worked on at the moment, and we're in consultation with our staff associations and unions, and those consultations are going well at the moment. So our procedures document will have to be in harmony with the regulations that the Minister will sign, and vice versa. And we also have selected a preferred bidder, a company that would carry out the testing on our behalf. So this will be a major change in terms of confidence for the public, that that there's a very low tolerance, or there's no tolerance for illicit drug taking. The Commissioner has spelled that out, and indeed it will be spelled out that this is something that would merit dismissal from the organisation. It would merit not getting into the organisation in the first place. It would merit being a student having their services dispensed with, and consideration through the disciplinary process for anyone in the job, to be dismissed. So,
am I correct in saying then that this policy will be introduced from September, and if a serving Garda is found to have failed a drug test, that they will face disciplinary procedures which may result in dismissal? That's correct. And they would also face similarly serious misconduct proceedings if they failed to submit to a drug test. So there would be 2 steps. And that drugs test is for all ranks of Garda? And for Garda staff. And can you talk to me a little bit about in-career vetting policy? Yeah, we're developing an in-career vetting, and I have set up a group that will look at this whole area. Our first meeting will be in July this year, but this is something that we've had to do on a bespoke basis in terms of competitions, but we're developing that on a more formalised basis for the future. Can you just outline a little bit what that would look like? So that, for instance, you could join on Garda Síochána, and 40 years later you may never have been vetted. You would have been vetted to get into the organisation, but let's imagine that you never applied for any promotion or any move. You might never have been vetted again. So you would take a risk-based approach to vetting. Like, for instance, there would be certain sensitive positions that obviously a deeper vetting would be required, or if you were going for promotion there would be vetting required, or if you were working in sensitive areas to do with children or vulnerable victims, there would be need for vetting. So it will have to be something that will be risk assessed and proportionate and commensurate with what's involved, and that's our thoughts on it. What's the timeline on that? It would be the second half of this year. And you've already mentioned engagement with the unions. Where is so in general with the drugs policy and in-career vetting, how is your engagement with the associations rather? The associations, I suppose, as you can imagine, they articulate the views and concerns of their members, and we've tried to address any concerns as best they can, but they accept that drug testing is going to take place. And where are you with a register of gifts? We publish a register of gifts.
That's with Human Resources.
Yeah, no, there's a regular. It's just published regularly. It's been running for many years.
So if I'm a member of the public and I rock into my local Garda station with a bottle of whiskey or vouchers for my local chipper, all those things are put in the register? Is there a threshold of value that's...
I'd be hoping you'd be sent away with your bottle of whiskey. There's no tolerance for taking alcohol within the organisation.
I appreciate focus on the alcohol, but what I'm getting at is the threshold in the value of the item. Is absolutely everything put on the register, or is there, the value of the only things that are put on the register are items over €100 or €1,000 or?
It's less than that, but there is a policy. Yeah.
50 euros.
50 euros.
Yeah.
No alcohol.
We've recently come through an evaluation by the Group of States Against Corruption, GRECO, and indeed the Anti-Corruption Unit supported the Department of Justice in Strasbourg recently at an evaluation meeting, and the evaluators actually met them afterwards and complimented the Gardaí on all the work that has been done in establishing the Anti-Corruption Unit. And certainly from our point of view, if it hadn't been established, I would be fearful of what the GRECO report might have said about Ireland. So that's one positive.
And the register of gifts, that's just an internal measure. It's not published.
It's published.
Published, I think.
Published on the website. On the website.
Yeah.
Is there a formal process to register conflicts of interest?
There's a conflict of interest policy is being developed. There are a number of policies that the Anti-Corruption Unit have prepared, but they haven't been taken through the consultation process with the association unions yet. But that will be one that will be very much next there. And
do you have any indicative timeline for that?
It's early next year. It's expected.
I appreciate this, Commissioner. I mean, it's a relatively young unit, and in a very short period of time, you've focused on a drug testing policy and career vetting, and
abuse of power for sexual gain is another very significant one, as you can appreciate.
Yeah, and that's one of my last questions. But so it is quite a lot of policies introduced in a short period of time. So it's understandable in a way that a conflict of interest policy will be the next port of attention.
Yeah.
So what are you doing in terms of preventative measures, so processes to detect behaviours that suggest unethical or inappropriate behaviour among staff?
So I suppose it started with very good training for the senior leadership team, and that cascaded its way down the ranks and grades. And another initiative that has taken place is the training of what's called the Anti-Corruption Liaison Officers Network, which would be at superintendent or assistant principal level, so that we're taking that out to having local contacts in the local divisions. We're also involved in providing training at superintendents courses, inspectors courses, sergeants courses, and we would see all of these as critical to get the message out there right throughout. It's not enough to have it at the national central office. It's very important to change the mindset. And I think people are surprised. For instance, when we were training our senior managers, we conducted a questionnaire at the end of it, and 81% said that after the training they got a better understanding of corruption. I think in the past we all saw corruption as being on the take financially, but it's any kind of gain for advantage. And an awareness of the importance of early intervention. 76% felt that the training addressed that. Knowledge of techniques to mitigate against corruption. 83% said that it met that, and the role in enhancing anti-corruption measures for all of them was enhanced, or it was reported as increased by 73%. So we did conduct a lot of, and indeed staff from the authority took part in as observers on some of the training courses. And
I want to compliment you on that. We a number of us sat in on that, and it was very educational, and it was, I thought, very well put together. What I'm getting at really is, apart from training of senior staff, I note there was a report recently that there was a submission by Garda Síochána to the Justice Oireachtas Committee about simulated corruption opportunities. So can you talk to me a little bit what that means?
So I suppose a general submission was made in relation to the Policing Security and Community Safety Bill, and one of them was around integrity testing, because I suppose naturally enough, somebody that's developing a new unit like an anti-corruption unit, you look to other jurisdictions and other services, and so when there's an opportunity to develop legislation, you look for what legal basis are you going to require, and this was an obvious one. Another one would have been the lawful business monitoring, so that that phones and devices and activity, like you could be concerned that somebody was improperly sending messages through our communication system or improperly using our phones to pass on information. So
what I'm getting at, I guess, are these simulated corruption incidences, is this like an undercover sting operation?
There would be systems put in place lawfully and proportionately to test to see would somebody become involved in corruption in certain circumstances.
And you would need a legislative basis for that?
Yes, very much so.
What levels of engagement have you had from members, and you've hinted at it already with regard to your surprise about the level of people wishing to complain directly rather than anonymously?
Yeah, I suppose there is a tendency to think that there isn't corruption in the Western Hemisphere, that this is something that happens in other places. And I think then it's when you educate people that corruption can be in the lowest form, like, for example, doing favours or turning a blind eye, or helping out business associates or family members. And it's a question of changing the mindset. And then when people see this, they will speak up and say, I know somebody who is doing the exact things that you told us about on the training course, and they'll send in genuine and bona fide reports about it.
In terms of the volumes, I understand that you can't give us precise numbers,
Yeah.
but what percentage of the number of complaints that you're receiving, for instance, are regarding legacy issues? What percentage are more contemporaneous issues?
By and large, they're contemporaneous. They're live and of now rather than historical.
And what percentage would you consider would be small scale, medium scale, big scale?
I suppose most of the things that have, so they'll be assessed by our intelligence office, and the cases that end up going to investigation will be on the more serious and of concern scale. That's as much as I would be prepared to say on it.
And as a long-serving police officer, Assistant Commissioner Clavin, and a head of the anti-corruption unit, are you surprised at the type of incidents that's coming through? What would your overall view of what you're seeing in the last year be?
I suppose, being around a long time, I've learned not to be surprised at human behaviour, and I suppose I've learned that Gardaí are human and that you have the same frailties. In terms of people at the margins tend to break the rules, and that's indicative of society. I suppose what I take comfort from is the level of reporting and the level of quality information that people are confident enough to bring to our attention, and I really do think that by big case, certain cases being investigated, that it will have a preventive effect in the longer term.
And compared to last year, the number of cases has increased?
Yeah, it has surprisingly gone up, yeah.
And I know that you can't point to particular geographical areas, but is there, in the complaints that you're getting, are they specific to certain areas? Do you see a pattern?
I suppose you would get geographical clusters, of complaints to do with individuals, yeah.
I don't have much time left. In regard to the Garda Inspector Counter-Corruption report, there were 34 recommendations, 11 which I think were short-term recommendations, 17 or so concerned short, medium-term term, and 2 were medium to long term, or thereabouts. Where are you with the implementation of those recommendations?
So we've been working with our colleagues in the Department of Justice, and my understanding is that the department will imminently, very soon, publish a joint implementation plan. But we've been working very closely with the department on it, and we've only in the last few weeks had the most recent meeting on it. So I think we welcome it. It was quite a collaborative process between ourselves and the inspectorate in terms of the report.
So the report was published in March 2021,
yes.
And there is the hope that in July 2022 that there will be a response by the department and yourselves.
Yes, yes.
Commissioner, can I ask an open-ended question, if I may, about any views that you may have with regard to the inappropriate sexual exploitation of vulnerable victims by Garda Síochána?
Well, it's obviously an area we take very seriously. We interact with members of the public, and there's obviously on many occasions an imbalance in the power in a relationship, and often a huge imbalance in that power. And so we're then, members of Garda Síochána, try and exploit that power imbalance for either sexual relationship or indeed an emotional relationship. We do regard that as a serious breach of trust in terms of our relationship with the public overall, and we do regard it as a serious breach of discipline. And only just within the last few weeks there, 16th of June, we've made this clear again to the organisation, and we have informed the organisation any breach of a professional boundary or any incident of abuse of power for sexual gain may constitute serious breach of discipline, which may lead to disciplinary action up to and including dismissal. We do regard it as very corrosive towards confidence in Garda Síochána, but also then we do regard it as well as being very dangerous in that individuals who've been the victim of this may be very reluctant to make contact and report crime, future crime to Garda Síochána, and that leaves them even in greater risk. So this is an area that we are very conscious of, and we regard very seriously.
So if I had an encounter with Garda Síochána and I was victim of crime, and a Garda had an inappropriate relationship with me, whether it be via social media, text message, physical, verbal, or whatever that sense of contact would be, where should I go? I mean, I can't go to the Garda station that he's at, and maybe, or he, I don't mean to genderize it, but I'll just use the word he, but
predominantly
this Garda tells me that they have friends in many different Garda stations, and no matter where I go, that there will be a difficulty in complaining. So what message of confidence would you have to such an individual?
Well, I would say in the first place, go to GSOC and make a complaint via GSOC. What our function is, and this is also then to seek for information and intelligence from Garda Síochána and members of Garda Síochána, so we can be proactive in actually looking for and find these instances where there's been an abuse of power relationship. But I would say to any individual who's found themselves in this position that GSOC is an independent organisation, and they will investigate this. Obviously, then we will become aware we regard this as being very serious, and we would have to go through all our requirements to protect all our members of the public as well.
Do you have many cases of this?
There are a number of investigations that are ongoing, and we're with GSOC, and they've made us aware of the seriousness of those. I can't put an overall figure on the number of suspensions in respect of this.
We have 16 suspensions for sexual related, and we have another 10 in relation to domestic violence related, and sometimes they're closely interlinked. It just might depend on the one, but it's something that's, there's small numbers, but it has a disproportionately detrimental impact on confidence and reputation.
And what proportion of these would be incidents that happened 10 years ago or contemporaneous issues?
They're generally contemporaneous, being honest about it. But I suppose as well, the anti-corruption unit is looking at this proactively as well, because sometimes you won't get a complaint. Sometimes you know it will appear to be consensual. So I think it's important for us to police this ourselves and not just wait on the unfortunate victim to have to come forward.
So do you have members of the force who have witnessed this and may come to the anti-corruption unit in confidence?
And very often it'll be a colleague who's very concerned about it and wants to go somewhere that will take action.
Okay. Thank you very much, Assistant Commissioner.
Thank you. Thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Commissioner. And thank you, Pat. Two quick questions maybe before we move on to the next item, maybe for Kate Mulcairns. The €50 limit on risk, is that an individual or a cumulative?
I proffered that in good faith in the hope that I'm correct on the amount. I'm not sure. 1.5, I'm sorry. I must have misheard a colleague telling me what it was. So I apologise. 1.5, 15. Okay. What is absolutely clear and very well known by all of us is the alcohol is an absolute prohibition, irrespective of value.
A 0-0 policy.
0-0 on alcohol. Apologies, I've outed myself as not knowing my 1.5 from my 5.0.
No, thank you for that. Just a brief comment stroke question, Commissioner. It's really encouraging, as we've heard, that people are coming forward to the anti-corruption unit with their views. There's a sense in which that might be perceived as speaking up, that is speaking upwards in the organisation and being able to do so with some degree of confidentiality. It's different from speaking out, and that is saying something openly in a team and calling into question some inappropriate behaviour. And are you confident that people have confidence in being able to do that? One reads occasionally in newspapers, one last month, where somebody who did, it is reported, we know nothing about it, but somebody who did speak out has subsequently been on sick leave as a consequence of the response to it. But speaking up is easier than speaking out in those circumstances. And do you think that there is a growing sense of confidence in people doing it, or do you think that it's still a difficulty for people within a team context?
Going by complaints, particularly complaints that are being investigated by GSOC, and then the number of members who have corroborated and supported GSOC in their investigations, as well as then those members who have raised concerns not to the AC anti-corruption unit, but raised those concerns within their own line management, and that is localised, in effect, speaking out whenever you raise a concern with the sergeant or inspector. So we are I do see examples of that, and that's very positive, where people see behaviour which they're not prepared to tolerate, and they recognise the risk of that behaviour, both to public confidence, but also themselves and their own integrity, and they are prepared to speak out in respect of it. So we see that, but again, there may be instances where individuals don't feel comfortable in doing that and prefer then the route of going to the anti-corruption unit. But what we are heartened there is that people are not just making anonymous complaints there, they are identifying themselves and making specific complaints, and such then these matters are a lot they're easier to investigate actually. If you get that substantiated complaint, then you can go back and check and obtain further information, so that makes our work easier.
I didn't mean anonymously, I meant that they could do it with some degree of confidence and an ability to consider. And what advice would you have, or what do you have to say to any member of the organisation who has spoken out and who feels that they weren't adequately listened to?
Well, if that is their sense of their in effect their lived experience of this, we'd wish to address that, because the public confidence of the organ in Garda Síochána depends upon the most positive behaviours being exhibited by the great majority of Garda Síochána. We want to make sure that, in effect, through all the work that we've done, the Code of Ethics, decision-making model, the work we've done in terms of the human rights training, human rights champions, that we're overall lifting the behaviours within Garda Síochána. And so if there's an individual who feels that they have not been supported or some way set adrift or cast adrift in this, then either they should make contact with their immediate supervisors or indeed make contact either with their regional assistant commissioner or indeed my own office, so that we can get the appropriate support in place for them. We want an organisation where people can speak out as well as speak up, and I think we're moving towards that. I'm pleased about the number of named reports that the ACU have received, and then they can take forward. I think that is positive in itself, because quite often then we're able to nip behaviours in the bud before, in effect, they grow out of all proportion, and the matter can be dealt with quickly.
Thanks, Commissioner. That's important to hear. Paul, I think, want to make a brief intervention before we move on.
One very quick follow-up, Pat, to what you were saying earlier on in relation to the drug testing. Yes. If a member fails the test, you were clear about what happens then. If a member refuses the test, what are is that dealt with as a sort of deemed failure, or how is that dealt with?
It will be treated as a serious breach of discipline. It would be like somebody who was stopped on the road and they were asked to give a breath test. It will be treated the very same way. It will be treated as you had some reason why you had something to hide. So there will be a serious investigation conducted in those instances.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. The next section of this meeting is a continuation of a topic that we have spent a great deal of time, and we will continue because of its significance, and that is the prevention and detection of domestic abuse, and Maureen is going to lead on this one.
Thanks. Thanks, Chair. As you noted, we've addressed this area on a number of occasions, and we've noted the particular emphasis that Garda Síochána has placed on dealing with domestic abuse and domestic violence, notably in terms of the initiative of the DPSUs, which have been a significant advance and universally welcome. But there are a couple of issues I'm interested in raising. We've mentioned this one at least once before, but probably more often than once, and that's in relation to domestic violence orders. And what the type of feedback that we've been getting from engagement with stakeholders is that there's been significant engagement with individual members of Garda Síochána, which displays either an ignorance of orders or certainly a knowledge which is far from optimal, such that victims of domestic violence will not have been given the type of advice or the assurance or the direction which certainly would assist them in addressing the particular horrendous situations in which they've faced. So, firstly, in terms of that issue of orders and the training of members of Garda Síochána in terms of their knowledge and how to address them, be interested if you'd be good enough to share with us the steps you've taken to enhance members' knowledge on a widespread basis.
Thank you very much. And obviously this is a very important area for us. We've put huge effort into this, and the actual the domestic abuse orders is an important element of the protection of individuals, and absolutely we want to get this right. And turn to Kate, can you speak to the work that's been done around training and respect domestic abuse orders? Have you?
And I will be as open as I possibly can. I can speak to it from memory, but because I was not anticipating staying for this segment, I haven't brought a briefing with me in that regard. I have responsibility for Crime Legal. Crime Legal have a significant role in developing any advices directly back to individual members, to particularly the specialist units, the DPSUs, regional and national. And we have a role also in supplementing training deficits in any area with the Garda College and in conjunction with colleagues throughout the criminal system, most especially the office and the DPP. So there's a number of areas, and particularly in domestic violence, where that training has been recorded, loaded on our LMS system, and is available both to specialist units and to generalists, because, of course, this is day-to-day guarding work as well as specialist guarding work. Our outreach also extends to the support services, the developed support services for domestic violence services and refuges in particular, because, again, that is a source of significant requests for information to both local and national and specialist units. In addition to that, the HQ directive, which I haven't got a copy of here, deals in detail and was crafted by Crime Legal to detail the types of orders, the circumstances, those that are available ex parte, those that are inter partes, and the process, most importantly, the court process in respect of that. And my colleagues here from ICT can probably assist with the information transfer then up onto Pulse and the availability of the existence of those orders to personnel through Pulse.
My concern, though, as I mentioned at the outset, is the extent to which it's coming back to us that the type of awareness that you're seeking to inculcate across the organisation is not evidence at an individual level, or certainly a significant number of individual instances that were reported to us, suggesting that they don't know. How as an organisation, do you gauge the extent of awareness or lack of awareness in relation to domestic abuse, domestic violence orders?
I'm simply not briefed sufficiently this afternoon, and I will take that away if that's okay with the group. But certainly our strong focus within Garda Legal is the crafting of the appropriate guidance. Our link to training is significant and important, but I can't speak to the domestic violence training element because that's not a primary responsibility for my area.
Chair, can I come in, please?
Please do.
This is very much an ongoing process, really, in terms of improving the standard of service that we provide to victims of crime, particularly vulnerable victims that may require advice in terms of DV orders, their availability and the service of them. And over the last 12 months alone, we've had extensive engagement with the court service and the DPP's office in terms of the service of orders. And I suppose, applying that consistency, whether it's service in the courts or whether it's service through the post, through register post. And side by side with that, then we've had an upgrade on our Pulse system, which allows us to track and upload the domestic violence or the domestic orders, so that when somebody goes to a call or a house or wherever, that they know through inquiry whether or not there is an order in existence, and then the tracking of that is really important.
Do you have a concern? Do you have a concern in relation to the extent of the awareness of those orders? And I'm just relating to the feedback that we've gotten. Do you share that concern?
Well, clearly, if the experience that's been relayed to you is that there is a deficit, I mean, that is very concerning. Now, I would say, in addition to that, over the last 12 months as well, we've domestic violence training, which is mandatory for everybody in the organisation. I completed it myself. Side by side with that, then, we have our risk assessment tool, which is currently in the final stages of of training in the DMR, which when they get to 80%, it'll be rolled out there as well. So I suppose the reason I mention all the strands is that there is a constant flow of information around domestic violence and the appropriate response and all that. But clearly, if we need to do more work and the feedback is such, well, then we need to double down on that, because really, every victim of domestic violence deserves and should expect to receive the appropriate advice and guidance in terms of what's available and how to go about that.
And I certainly appreciate that point, and I'm very conscious in terms of the government's new policy this week on domestic violence and gender-based violence, and I just feel that despite all the initiatives that Garda Síochána have taken, that there may well be a gap in terms of individual awareness. And it would be something that I'd certainly be interested in your looking at and a little bit further. It may be localised, it may be regionalised, it may be not so widespread, but certainly the reports that we've gotten back is sufficiently
and I suppose,
cause for concern.
In that regard, not wishing to ask you to breach any confidences, if there's directions of travel you could point us in, that would be very helpful.
Thank you for that. We do share the same concern in relation to awareness on breaches on breaches of orders, and it's in the same family to a large extent. So we would be concerned not just in terms of the an awareness of the orders that may be available to be dealt with or to be extracted, but also in terms of the manner in which breaches of orders might be dealt with. And we do have some concerns. Some of the concern that has been fed back to us is in relation to the knowledge or the awareness of individual Gardaí of how of how people who have been the victims of breaches of orders, the avenues open to them, and the capacity of individual Gardaí to inform people of that. So we do have concerns in relation to that particular issue as well. So in terms of your addressing the awareness of existing orders, we'd also like you to think in terms of potential steps to address how breaches of orders, that knowledge and awareness of breaches of orders, might be sort of well inculcated with individual members of the force.
Yes, certainly. Our Protective Services Bureau at national level are the policy owners for this in conjunction with training. So certainly I'll have a conversation with them in that regard, because they're all, the bundle of issues that you've outlined are all interconnected. So they do need a holistic approach in terms of a response.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much. The second area, very, very briefly, if I might, is the area of victim-offender relationships. And again, an interesting area, and I know that Garda Síochána, the Chief Information Officer, has done a significant amount of work on this, and we've had the benefit of a presentation back in February in relation to this matter, and that involved research into looking at the relationships across a whole range of areas between the victim and the offender, the perpetrator, and in turn there was more detailed work where the victim-offender relationship, where there was a potential to deep dive into certain areas. So you looked at the whole area of domestic violence and the extent to which the three areas you identified, the fact that there were similarities across all regions experienced, identifying that the fact of current intimate partner spouse and blood relative and former intimate partner spouse at the top three of that relationship. What I'm interested in, what the policing authority is interested in, is what are you doing with this information beyond informing you?
Thank you, Anna. Thank you.
So, as you said, Moling, we introduced the victim-offender relationship as pretty much the final step in the process to make sure that we are correctly identifying and recording cases of domestic abuse, which obviously includes domestic violence. But the wider domestic abuse is important to note as well, because what perhaps may have escaped previously is that violence is obviously pretty obvious, but less obvious forms of domestic abuse, such as theft and even cases of fraud and even taking cars without consent. They all constitute domestic abuse as well. So what the victim-offender relationship has given us is a much richer insight into the nature of domestic abuse. And as you've heard previously from Chief Superintendent Noonan, is that domestic abuse tends to be an escalating pattern, that it may start with lower levels, I suppose, of forms of abuse, and then escalate up to violence, and even the violence itself then can escalate. So there's a few things that we're doing. So the first thing to note, I suppose, is that the victim-offender relationship has given us almost, I'd say, pretty much complete accuracy of tracking domestic abuse reports, that we know that something is domestic abuse now pretty much automatically. It's worth noting, though, as I've said before, that it was only a small number of cases that were being missed previously. It was about 3 or 4%, and it was tended to be more the edge cases. So a few things that we've seen, though, from publishing these figures, and obviously the interaction between the Garda members and the members of the Garda Information Services Centre, is that the number of cases now that we're catching, if that's the right term, from the victim-offender relationship after the fact has fallen away. It started off at, I think, about 6% when we first started this back last July or August. It currently stands as 3%, and it's falling pretty much kind of month on month. So it's that kind of circular sort of activity, is that by measuring something and then by feeding back to people to say, once the victim-offender relationship is there, then the GIS call taker will ask the member to say, this looks as if it could be a case of domestic abuse. That, of course, then informs the member, and then the next time that they call, and they'll also tell their colleagues as well. So that softer sort of cultural side, and that's definite in terms of the improvement of catching edge cases of domestic abuse. The second thing that we've done, fueled again by the victim-offender relationship and other forms of data we touched on earlier on, the very high level of compliance with callbacks. And again, that's an example, I suppose, of a kind of a circular behaviour. By measuring that and by introducing almost, I suppose, a degree of competition between divisions, we've seen that progressively increase, as the Deputy said, is consistently now up close to 90% compliance with the 1 week callback requirement. The final thing that we're doing is, final, I suppose, of the immediate things that we're doing is we are compiling a report on high-level conclusions on the nature of domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. So you've touched on yourself, Moling, some of the characteristics there. But I mean, one of the most encouraging things about it, and we are going to publish that report. Absolutely, the report itself is finalised. We're just doing some final data coherence checks because some of these figures are extremely sensitive, and we want to make sure that we get them right. Is that incidents with a domestic abuse motive have increased in recent years. So that they were expected to increase, and we obviously proactively put in place Operation Freeshiv as part of the pandemic, and accelerated our activities as part of that. So we expected, and in fact they did go up as part of or during the pandemic, but they continue to go up, and that's been a trend now that's consistent across a number of years. So we're now able to tell that with very high degrees of accuracy the nature of the relationships that are driving these increases in domestic abuse. But the key thing I suppose I want to highlight, and it's encouraging, is that the rate of reporting is such, and the improvements, as I said, in the recording practice are that reporting is now a factor is probably actually the primary factor in the increase, as opposed to an increased prevalence of domestic abuse, as in it was always there, it perhaps just wasn't being reported. No, and again, that issue of capturing, let's call it, lower levels of domestic abuse early is very important. And sorry, the final thing I want to say that we plan to do is to introduce a more predictive element to domestic abuse policing, that we can start to spot those patterns earlier, because clearly there are both repeat offenders that go to a new relationship and it starts again and tend to follow the same, unfortunately, pattern. And again, without any sense of or any hint of blame towards the victims, that are also unfortunately repeat victims as well.
No, that's very, very useful, Andrew. Thank you very much for that. I think the critical issue for us is in terms of the material that has been extracted from the research that has been done, that it informs the approach that in Garda Síochána informs in a positive way how they address issues that arise. And it occurs to me that the issue of domestic violence and domestic abuse goes beyond that familial, that intimate relationship into the familial parent, son, brother, daughter, whatever it might be, beyond the intimate relationships. And I'm just wondering, has your research also informed you significantly on this, and has it informed the approach that in Garda Síochána will take in a manner analogous to what you used in dealing with domestic violence between intimate partners?
Yeah, again, I suppose that the fact that we're now recording the exact relationship between the victim and the offender gives us that kind of greater insight. So one example of where we're changing the way that we record it is this notion of the original term that was used as blood relative. We're actually changing that now, exactly as you said, Moling, to one of interfamilial relationship, to capture the fact that, you know, when people may not be related by blood, they're still you know, intimately related.
I raised this, Andrew, in the context of the particularly challenging situation which we encountered in Cork with the murders that occurred there, and there was the issue in terms of the callback, if you recall. Was a particularly significant issue, and where it's clear that you place significant emphasis on and are very successful in terms of the extent to which you call back where there are potential issues of domestic violence between intimate or formerly intimate partners. Is there an issue that this research informs or should inform the approach that you might take to the more the non-intimate or non-former intimate partners?
Well, absolutely. I mean, what we're looking to map out or to model, I suppose, is the nature, and it tends again to be the escalating nature of domestic abuse, that we can track the patterns which would allow, if we can provide that information in early form to Garda. Sorry.
So can I take it then that it's either under consideration or happening already, that in such a situation where there's the potential for problems with violence within a family, but not of the type immediately captured by our traditional perception of domestic violence, that it's now policy that that it will always be presumed that there will be a callback, and that.
Well, that's the case already for domestic abuse. It's not just domestic violence; it's domestic abuse.
No, but where, for example, the issue occurred in Cork, where you got a call back saying it's not a problem anymore. If that was a matter between partners or former partners, you would go out. The requirement is that a member will go to the location anyway.
Yeah. Do you want to cover the operations?
Sorry, carry on.
Yes, Moling. So this research and this data is new, and we're still working our way through, and the final report is not still completed. So in terms of organisational policy, we haven't got to that stage yet. We're at the pre-policy stage in terms of our research. But in terms of the broader definition of domestic abuse, certainly that's an area that we will be looking at. You know, and I suppose there have been a number of cases around the country of the type that you've just mentioned in terms of the broader familial relationships and issues arising.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Sorry, I just wanted to make one final comment about this, and just the issue of reporting, and just to acknowledge this was the work of the authority, of the media, of other kind of NGOs, and everyone together, just kind of raising the awareness of domestic abuse, and it's certainly not just our work that's led to that increase in reporting rates. But I mean, that's absolutely essential, is that the more that this is reported, the more that we can deal with it. So that's a trend that we hope is going to continue. And just to acknowledge this was the work of many groups in achieving that.
Thank you. And it's certainly a theme to which we will return regularly. We're over our time, but there are one point of clarification and two brief questions that we have. Donald.
Thanks very much, Chairman. I realise that we're in injury time, so I'm going to be pretty brief. Your budget this year is just under 2 billion. Have you a sense of what you're going to need in 2023 to maintain your existing level of service in percentage terms?
I think we're still in the middle of the estimates discussions, and as the Commissioner referenced in the private session, outcomes of the rosters discussions will have a significant factor on that. The timing of recruitment will have a piece in that. So do I have a number today, Donald? I don't. But we are engaged with TIPA around those conversations, and clearly we'll have a better sense of that in the short period ahead. What I do know on the capital side, there is a substantial shortfall in terms of what we would have expected. I think, you know, what our ask ideally would have been is probably going to fall about the guts of 60 million short of what we would have ideally liked, just on the capital front. Now, and that's assuming that the indicative allocation that we were told in the National Development Plan was going to be available to us is actually delivered, and we won't know that obviously until budget time. So, but that's just to give you one figure of concern.
I suppose the other concern is inflationary pressures, so even things like fuel there and our sizable fleet, and also then we have to bear in mind pay rises as well. So 2.05 billion euro this year, and so if you factor in inflation costs plus wage inflation, and also then the desire to grow the organisation as well, there's significant uplift in budget would be the overall aim. I'm not sure what order that would be. We'd have to work this all through, but we have a number of concerns. If we wish to see the organisation grow as well, obviously the wage bill will grow in any case, plus salary increase.
I suppose the concern is that this will seriously pause the reform programme if you don't get the resources that you need to do. But it should be very helpful when you get more clarity on the numbers, if you could let us know.
Yeah, the capital piece, we flagged consistently that unless the money is provided in the ICT domain, then that limits the ability on delivering some of the reforms that are required. So we would certainly be hoping that that there is a generous allocation around that. But as it stands, in terms of the indicative allocation, if that's even delivered upon, that still falls short beyond what we would have sought.
So anything that you can give us on the productivity benefits from this investment, I think, is very, very helpful. I know we've talked about this before.
There's 4 or 5 big ICT projects next year, which are really essential. They're just needed to maintain the business of policing, and certainly will provide information on those, because between them there's substantive costs, and then that's would also be body-worn cameras, but digital evidence processing, but also Pulse, also uplift in Schengen. So we can provide details of those, and also we will be this year moving into new premises as we vacate Harcourt Square. So there's a big emphasis on finishing off on that estates process for this year. So that's good.
Just looking at the house return, you're within profile. Do you think is your current forecast that you'll be within budget this year?
I think there are stresses that are only feeding through the system, so overtime is running hot, and certainly I suppose the slower pace of recruitment is probably keeping us in terms of profile at the moment. I would say we'll be, with pressures on pensions and some other areas, and as the Commissioner described, some of the cost increases are around fuel, etc., etc. I'd say we'll be struggling to hold it within profit. We'll clearly do everything we can, but I think it's at this stage it's risky.
I'm taking that as a no.
Yes, it's a no.
Yes, it's a no.
I think we've given a commitment to DPER to obviously stay within budget. So that's, but it will, if we are to stay within budget, it will mean some very tough choices later in the year. That's probably a better way of putting it.
Just 2 final ones. If you look at the detail of the house return, you're 38% behind on capital spending on computers, 61% behind on transport. Is that a timing difference, or is?
It's timing.
But I think it's very important that you actually do spend.
I know it's purely timing. These are issues of timing.
And the final one is overtime. It's 22% ahead of profile. Before it was really COVID related. I suppose the concern is that an overspend at overtime is becoming embedded in the system. People get dependent on it. And
what I'd point out about overtime, and we've done a lot of work in respect of the analysis of our overtime. There's a proportion of it is tied into the quarter-hour briefing time. So in effect, that is a stable cost. It grows as the organisation grows, because more people then obviously claim the briefing time. The other factor is the return of the courts and just the amount of court business there is, and then the attendance of Gardaí as witnesses, and that's in an order of about 30% of our overtime budget. But at our latest senior leadership team, we're very clear about just the need actually not only just stay within budget, but actually just really dampen down overtime expenditure. And together with Executive Director Finance, I'm working through just a set of instructions to the organisation, really, which will prohibit all overtime except that which is pre-authorised, and that includes also then, that will include some of our proactive operations, and also then some of our other deployments as well, just really running the ruler over those and make sure they're absolutely essential. But there's some things within our overtime expend which are just unavoidable. At the same time, the overtime as a figure has stayed static now for a number of years, and against that then there's been, so it hasn't actually had a real cost increase. So, and we've factored that in as well. But we're very mindful of the importance of the overtime budget, and it's seen as a barometer for how we're doing otherwise financially. So we're just very careful of it too.
Okay, thank you. That's all for me.
Thank you, Donald. Two quick things, Commissioner. In your introduction to the Commissioner's monthly report, you very rightly speak about the increase in fatalities as a result of road traffic collisions in the early part of, in the year thus far compared to previous years where we had seen declines. And I wonder whether you have any sense of what the causative factors might be, or more particularly, are there things that you might want to say to people as we enter into the summer period in relation to behaviour on the road?
Well, all these are a tragedy. A lot of these fatalities were entirely preventable. On social media, we've had this week our Be a Lifesaver and Slow Down campaign, where we've asked people and celebrities to join us on a social media campaign to ask people to slow down, but still too much drink driving, too much drug driving, and also then the other lifesaver offences are prevalent. People not wearing seatbelts, and that's a pattern in these fatalities that we've seen. But also people distracted either on mobile phones or travelling at excess speed. The amount of single vehicle collisions that we've had, which no other road users involved, but a vehicle which leaves a roadway and there's a fatality or fatalities as a result then of the ensuing collision. We carry on our enforcement effort. We carry on obviously our public engagement around, along with the Road Safety Authority, but also then we want individuals to contribute to the social media campaign as well, and we've asked for that through both Instagram and also then on TikTok as well, because I do think it's a good way of getting the message through to a particular set of road users as well. And then if I might turn to Anne-Marie just about the specific operations that are ongoing and what else is being considered, please.
Thanks, Commissioner. So I suppose key to our operational activities are what we see by way of trends and patterns. And this year to date, just over or almost 45% of the fatal road traffic collisions occurred between 12 noon and 6 p.m. in the evening. So this is obviously a cohort of people who are potentially driving to or from work, or maybe going about their lawful business. So in terms of our response to that, then obviously we're going to target our checkpoints and our various strategies to try and be more proactive around those times. Equally, we have 17 motorcyclists who've lost their lives this year. It's a huge increase. So obviously we need to do something with that community as well in terms of engagement and education, etc. And I suppose heretofore it was the concept of the young male driver, that we sort of heard and saw as the predominant person who lost their life to road traffic collision. Now the range is much broader. It's everything from early teens all the way to 80 plus, and there is no particular spike anywhere along the line. So it's right along that continuum. So I suppose it places a greater challenge to us really in terms of targeting a particular cohort of people. But together with the Road Safety Authority, we will be doing that, and we will be working to try and, I suppose, redouble our efforts in that context. So we'll have operations coordinated right around the country in that context. And I suppose the issue of drug driving is ever ever-present, really. Since 2019, we have 40% increase in terms of our drug driving offences. So that's quite considerable in that context. So, as the Commissioner said, our Be a Lifesaver campaign has been launched, and I suppose we all have, guards and civil society have a role to play in that. Everybody in this room potentially can be a lifesaver. So in that context, I have a plea to everybody, to just, I suppose, reinforce that message to friends and family and all around. So we have a job of work to do as a society to try and get everybody to slow down. Thank you, Chair.
A worthy sentiment and should be heard and acted upon. Thank you, Deputy Commissioner and Commissioner. Final point, and it's a point of clarification, at the public meeting in Monaghan last month, and precisely because it was public, there was a brief exchange in relation to the CAD 999, the consideration of the cancellation of CAD 99 incidents, and the work that's being done in relation to that. And in parenthesis, just to say that the work of Mr. Derek Penman is continuing. The independent external expert that the authority had commissioned to undertake some work. We hope to have a presentation from him at our July meeting, which is a meeting in private, and that we will have a discussion on that at the public meeting in September. But the specific thing was there was an exchange at the meeting in Monaghan, which certainly for us gave the impression that a new review of a range of priority cases, additional to that which had been undertaken last year, was being undertaken in the current year. And that was not what was intended to be said, and was not what was intended to be understood from it. And maybe, Deputy Commissioner, you might like to just underline that point and clarify the nature of the work to which you were referring at the last meeting.
Yes, Chair, thank you for that. So no, absolutely not. It's the same cadre of offences. We haven't started or undertaken, nor has there been need to start or undertake any new review. It's the same review. We're working our way through it. We're at the concluding stages, and we're in the process of doing, analysing the finer end of the detail, and hopefully by the next meeting we will have our final report for the authority.
Very good. Okay, because we were very pleased from subsequent discussions to appreciate the fact that there wasn't a new cause or cause for a further review. And it was happy that we have the opportunity to clarify that for ourselves, but also for anybody who was a participant in or who had seen anything subsequently on the authority's website. Thank you for that. That brings us over time to the end of this meeting. Thank you, Commissioner, and to all of your colleagues, and thank you to authority members for this meeting. I hope that before we meet again in public, that everybody will have had an opportunity for some rest and recreation at some stage in the summer, and that there may even be something resembling a summer in which to rest and recreate ourselves. Thank you very much indeed. The meeting is now over.
Thank you.